Okay. This is going to be the last session of the day. It's quite a long one. And this is all around transboundary problem identification and prioritisation. And then we're going to have a whole group exercise where we'll work as a whole. So, where are we? We are now step 3. Identification and prioritisation of transboundary problems. So in this section you're going to learn about what are transboundary problems, what are shared environmental problems, something around climate change. Is it international waters transboundary problem, or is it something else? And then we're going to look at a process for identifying and prioritising transboundary problems, and we'll then use that process together. So, what is a transboundary problem? This is my definition. A transboundary problem is an environmental problem that is transboundary in scale. So, what we're talking about here are environmental problems as a starting point. So, they're transboundary environmental problems. In other words, it's an environmental problem originating in or contributed by one country and affecting another. Okay? Now it might be affecting might have a global effect. So it might not just be happening in one place, but it might then have, like migratory species, have a global impact. That in essence is what a transboundary problem is. Transboundary environmental problem. So I've got a couple of examples. Not a very good slide. This is a river. This is the river Dnipro, which flows through, well, it rises in Belarus, goes through Ukraine, and ends up in, it rises in Russia, goes through Belarus, then into Ukraine, and then into the Black Sea. So, a classic example of a transboundary problem from a river perspective, which is very easy to explain, is nutrients are emitted in upstream countries and the impacts are felt in a downstream country. Classic example of a transboundary problem. Another example, another very bad slide. Somewhere in there is the Mediterranean. And the red dots here are indicating transboundary sites at risk related to Mediterranean marine biodiversity. So there are seagrass sites, cetaceans, Mediterranean monk seals, turtles, and then certain flora and fauna that are considered to be sites at risk. So there's a whole range of them around the Mediterranean. Morocco is here, Spain is here, Italy is here, Libya is here, Egypt, Israel, so this is the Mediterranean. Very bad slide. The loss of habitats from loggerhead turtles occurs in a number of different places around the Mediterranean. Now, on its own, that's not transboundary because it may be that, for example, if the loggerhead species just swam around offshore here, it's not transboundary. But the fact is that loggerheads travel great distances to get to these sites. In fact, most of the loggerhead migration occurs through the Straits of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean from the Atlantic. So this is another classic example of a transboundary environmental problem. Habitat, loss of habitats, specifically loss of habitats for loggerhead turtles, occurring in one country, but being affected by loss of loggerhead turtles due to fishing practices way outside of this particular marine system. Or it could be happening within this marine system, but whatever, it's transboundary. Okay? Is that okay? nothing contentious about that. So that's what we could call a transboundary environmental problem, and we'll come on to other examples of that in a minute. Something else I want to introduce is the idea of shared environmental problems, because not all problems are going to be transboundary. A shared environmental problem is an environmental problem that is shared between two or more countries in a given water system. The problem is not transboundary, given the definition that I gave above, but it is a common problem in the region. So in the Black Sea, for example, one shared problem was coastal erosion. Coastal erosion was happening in all the countries, but you couldn't say the coastal erosion that's happening in Romania had any effect on Bulgaria. So there's no real evidence to show that it's transboundary, but it is shared amongst all of those countries. And I'm going to give you another little example here from a completely different water system. Any idea what that is? We know what continent it is, that's Africa. Any idea what this is? It is the Nubian Aquifer. Oh, yes, you get lots of marks for observation. Yes, this is the Nubian Aquifer, sandstone aquifer. This aquifer spreads across a vast area of land, including Libya, Egypt, Chad, and Sudan. And there are water in here is called fossil water. It's millions of years old, potentially, certainly tens of thousands of years old. And came about because of the Nile. Nile filled this aquifer tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago. The Nile has since reduced in size and is no longer recharging this aquifer. So the water is not being recharged, it's not being added to, but it's there. And it's being pumped by at least two of those countries, Libya and Egypt. And it's fossil water, so in essence it's a bit like oil. Okay, it's non-renewable. So when it's gone, it's gone. So this is a project about sharing that water. And a lot of the problems for aquifers are shared problems because there's necessarily no way of linking the pumping of water in one country with some kind of environmental impact in another. Okay, so that's another example of a shared water problem. So we've got these two kinds of categories essentially. We've got transboundary and we've got shared. And there are also going to be problems that are just one country specific, that are only affecting one country. From the JES perspective, we want to focus on transboundary, but I think there's a common understanding that it's important to recognise those shared issues, and there is also an understanding that it's worth recognising certain national issues as they are very important. So, question.
Can a shared problem become a transboundary problem?
Yes. Can a shared problem become a transboundary problem? Absolutely. Because often shared problems are what are happening on the ground now, but there's a chance that in the future that shared problem will become transboundary. And that's certainly the case within aquifers, where as the aquifers pump more, there's a chance that there will be an impact felt somewhere else, then it becomes transboundary. And that may have, I don't know if there are analogues in LMEs, I have no idea, but that's something we could discuss in a little while. So, a list you can't read, but what I will do, lower it to the size of it. Can you all see that? Can you read it from the back? It's It's in English. I apologise, but I will go through them. This is giving a list of some projects, LME projects, certainly marine projects, and what their identified transboundary environmental problems were. This is to give you a sense of what other projects have found. So if we look at, and you'll see also that there's often a lot of commonality between projects. So if we look at the Black Sea, the Black Sea's transboundary problems were nutrient over-enrichment, so that's eutrophication, declining natural resources, fisheries, for example, chemical pollution, habitat and biodiversity changes, including alien species, and alien species introductions. So that's the Black Sea. If we look at the Guinea current, large marine ecosystem, so this is current off the west coast of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. Decline of fish stocks, loss of ecosystem integrity, deterioration in water quality from land-based sources, eutrophication and harmful algal blooms, habitat destruction and alteration. Mediterranean Sea had 3 transboundary problems: decline in biodiversity, decline in fisheries, decline of seawater quality. South China Sea, large marine ecosystem, is modification of habitats, overexploitation of living aquatic resources, pollution of aquatic environments. South China Sea, the Yellow Sea, pollution problems, ecosystem problems, fishery problems, biodiversity problems. Bay of Bengal, overexploitation of marine living resources, degradation of critical habitat, pollution, and the Caribbean large marine ecosystem, unsustainable fisheries, habitat degradation and pollution. So you can see there's a lot of commonality here, which is to be expected, I guess. Let's give you an idea of what we mean by transboundary problems. Some focus on just one, 2 or 3, some focus on a lot more. Climate change. Where does climate change fit into this? And there's a potential argument that climate change could be considered to be a transboundary environmental problem. So I ask the question, is it? Historically, in most TDAs and SAPs, climate change has been seen beyond the scope of International Water Project intervention. So generally doesn't get considered to be a transboundary problem. That said, climate change is an external driver of many of those problems that have been encountered above, and something that cannot be changed in the short to medium term, although its impact can be mitigated against. So the issue here is where do we put climate change? And this is something this project is going to have to consider. Is climate change just considered to be an external driver of many of the problems and has its own chapter in the TDA? Does it get considered to be